My ongoing quest to hunt out unusual audio formats, and in particular background music devices, has resulted in me acquiring this old lump of a thing. It comes from a plane. Remember those? They were good, weren't they? To be specific, it comes from a British Airways Boeing 757. BA retired the last of their 757 fleet back in 2010, hence this part of one of them finding its way onto eBay a decade later. So I bought this from a company in Israel that deals in tech surplus. They'd listed a handful of these for perhaps a year or so, and I kept seeing them appearing in my search results. But one day they had a sale on, and I gave in and I bought one just out of curiosity. It's a very functional design, but I really do appreciate this latch system. It feels like it would work forever. But of course that's the feeling you want from anything that's supposed to be part of an aircraft. You don't want things to feel flimsy. There's only one physical control on this one. It's a 5-way selector which presumably could be adjusted by the crew. The 4 tape cartridges are all metal bodied. The tapes labelled A, B and C each contain passenger announcements in a variety of languages. One of the tapes is missing its label, but the other 2 labels are identical to one another, which show that the tapes are supposed to be used as a set of 3. Cartridge A contains safety and emergency announcements in English, as well as routine announcements in French, German and Italian, while carts B and C are responsible for the playback of those same routine announcements in other languages. So if, for example, the crew wanted to make announcements in Greek, then tape C would be called into action to play track 8. There's a message to play before takeoff, another before landing, and a final one after landing. Of course the crew can make their own ad hoc announcements as well. This is really there, I think, as an option in case there's no one on the crew that can speak the appropriate language. Taking a look inside the machine, you can see that the tape head at the bottom is very worn, especially when compared to the others. This is one that would have played the background music. It's very likely to have been the only tape this machine played if, for example, it spent its time doing a London to Glasgow route. Tape A does have a standard safety briefing on track 5. That's the usual thing about how to use your seatbelts and where the exits are, so they could have played that one, but in my experience they tended to do things like that live, so it's perhaps again here just as a backup. Of course, we don't know which plane this was on and what happened to that plane after it left the British Airways fleet. They'll have sold it on to someone else and maybe it got used with a different carrier. Perhaps they continued using the background music cartridge and played it until the tape snapped, because the BGM tape has snapped and that head has definitely seen a lot of action. Now looking at the rest of the mechanism, you can see we've got a long capstan down the side here which pushes against the pinch roller in the activated cartridge, and then on the right there are 3 micro switches which indicate the presence of a cartridge in that position. If we look closer we can see that each cart has 2 4-track tape heads. However, these are staggered from one another, so that creates 8 discrete tracks which can be accessed on each 1/4-inch tape, which of course correspond with the 8 programs that are listed on the label. As far as the rest of the box goes, well, there's very little to see other than a multi-pin connector on the rear. The larger pins in the centre would be the ones that carried the power, which could be either 115 volts AC or 28 volts DC. We'll assume that the warranty has expired on this. After all, it seems to have been produced in or around October 1980, so let's take a look inside. Now it's all held together with one screw, and once the cover is removed you can see there's quite a lot going on in here. Now when I first saw this for sale I thought it was going to be a simple background music machine that would have an on-off switch and I'd be able to send some power into it and tap the audio output and use it as a music player. It turns out that it's a heck of a lot more complicated than that. There's nothing simple at all about this, and it's clear that this is only really half of the machine. This is the player, but the controls, they're all distributed elsewhere in the plane. You can see how a few things in here operate though. For example, how it selects which cartridge is to be played. There's a cam type mechanism, I think, behind this panel, which pushes one of 3 rods through into the cartridge bay, and these rods bring the pinch roller in that cartridge into contact with the capstan. I'll show you how all that works when we look at a cartridge in a minute. I also noticed what looks like a big blue battery. Of course, if the plane lost all its electrical power, you'd want this thing to still be able to play emergency announcements. And it turns out, though, that this is actually a heavy-grade capacitor rather than a battery, which makes sense. Just out of interest, I tried running some power through the device, but without the rest of the control equipment that this attaches to, it unsurprisingly didn't do anything. So now let's take a look at the tapes. The background music cartridge has a different design to the other one, so I'll open that one first. It's an endless loop cartridge. The tape is pulled from the centre of the reel by the pinch roller, and after passing over the playhead is deposited back on the outside of the rotating reel. There's a brake that gets engaged when the cartridge is removed to stop the tape accidentally unspooling, and looking at the tape, it's clear that this really was played until it jammed and then snapped. The eagle-eyed amongst us might have noticed that this is a light sensor, and I'm going to presume that this hole next to it is where the light source would come out of to hit that sensor. It would only hit it though once it had reached the end of the tape, because there's a clear section of tape and the light would shine through there, bounce back off this mirror on the bottom of the tape cartridge and into the sensor. I'm going to guess the idea was that you wanted to play a full loop of tape every time you activated the background music, but you didn't want it just to continue playing forever. But let's move on now and have a look at one of the announcement cartridges. Now, just like the background music tape, this is also an endless loop, but the mechanism in here is quite a bit different. You'll also notice we've got a date on this reel of 1995. So first off, let's have a look how the cartridge was activated by that rod. It pushes through this hole, which brings the pinch roller into contact with the capstan in the player. So that's how it selects which of the tapes is going to be played. It only brings one tape into contact at a time. Now, this is a much more precise tolerance than any other endless loop tape system I've seen before. The tape comes off the centre of the reel, travels under this plastic peg, around another one at the bottom before passing between two spring-loaded pads and then onto the foam pressure pad, which is where the playhead would push against it. Then it goes through this tiny gap over another pad. Presumably this is all to keep it nice and clean, and then it goes around the pinch roller and back on the outside of the reel. The slightly unusual thing with this one, and it's something I've seen done before with shorter length NAB carts, is that the tape reel itself doesn't actually spin. The reel is fixed in place. The only thing that moves is the tape as it slides over itself. You might have spotted the foil splice on the tape. This is what the machine uses to determine whereabouts it is on an endless loop. It needs something, so it has one of these before each announcement. So no doubt it counts these as it goes, so then it doesn't end up playing the "Thank you for flying with British Airways, please take your belongings with you" before the plane's even taken off. Now let's move on to getting the audio off these tapes. First, the background music cartridge. It's unlikely, even if this machine was working, that that tape head would now do a good job of reproducing the audio, so it's a matter of taking the tape out of the cartridge and spooling it onto a normal reel, and then from there rewinding it back onto another reel, and then playing it back through my main machine while I recorded it onto a PCM recorder. It turns out that it's a simple piece of music. It kind of swells and grows, then goes back again, so the fact that a section of it has been lost or destroyed doesn't really matter too much, as I was still able to capture a good 22 minutes of it. Now for the announcements. Well, ideally, it would be great if I could just plug the playback machine into something. Unfortunately, though, that something is supposed to be a Boeing 757, and I don't have one. I had a look online, though, and I could buy one for $14 million, which seems a little bit overkill just to capture perhaps 10 minutes or so worth of audio. And while I could thread the tape onto my reel-to-reel recorder like I did with the background music tape, it wouldn't play properly as the heads won't line up with the tracks. In fact, it would sound exactly like this.
Señoras y señores pasajeros, les damos la bienvenida a bordo de este vuelo de British Airways. Antes de iniciar el despegue...
And while I could manipulate the audio in Audacity to isolate one of the channels, it's going to be no use because each track is overlapping with another one.
Esté correctamente colocado en los compartimentos superiores.
Ideally, I'd have something like a Fostex R8, which is an 8-track quarter-inch machine, but I don't have one of those. However, one thing I do have is an 8-track cartridge player that I can use. So I got the announcement tape and I threaded it into an 8-track cart. Now, I've got to say that is easier said than done, but once I got it done, well, it sounds like this.
Grasp the nearest oxygen mask.
Avant le décollage, veuillez vous assurer que votre bagage à main...
So what we've got now is a 2-track head playing on an 8-track tape, so it's listening to 4 stereo programs, but each of the channels is a different thing. So it's just a matter of recording the whole tape 4 times, one for each of the 4 programs, and then putting that recording into Audacity and splitting the left and right channels into individual tracks.
Avant notre décollage,
Remain in
veuillez
your
vous assurer
seat.
que le dossier de
If
votre siège...
standing, sit down on the nearest seat. use the strap on your mask to keep it in place.
I'll start off with the background music, the music you hear while you're boarding the plane and you're settling into your seat, and then I'll move on to playing some of the standard safety briefing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to run through our safety procedures and equipment. The safety card in your seat area shows details of escape routes, oxygen masks and life jackets. It also shows the bracing position which you must adopt in an emergency landing. The emergency exits are on both sides of the aircraft. They are clearly marked and are being pointed out to you now. 2 at the rear of the aircraft and 2 at the front of each cabin section. Please take a moment now to locate the exit nearest to you, keeping in mind that the nearest usable exit may be behind you. To help you find your way to the exits, additional lighting will be provided in the aisles at floor level.
I've cut that short because if you've ever flown, then you're more than familiar with similar safety briefings. So let's move things on a bit to when the plane is in the air and an announcement that you're far less likely to have heard.
Attention, attention. Grasp the nearest oxygen mask and put it over your nose and mouth immediately. Breathe normally. Remain in your seat. If standing, sit down on the nearest seat. Use the strap on your mask to keep it in place, then fasten your seat belt tightly. There is no cause for alarm. There has been a loss of air pressure within the cabin. The aircraft is descending to an altitude where pressurization is not required. Normal conditions will return shortly. There is no cause for alarm.
And now let's play an announcement that really is perhaps the last thing that you'd ever want to hear on a plane.
Attention, attention. This is an emergency announcement. I repeat, this is an emergency announcement. It may shortly be necessary to make an emergency landing on water. You must listen carefully to the following instructions. Your life jacket is under your seat. Remove it and put it on, but do not, I repeat, do not inflate it inside the aircraft. When you have fitted your life jacket, sit down, put your seat back upright, table stowed, armrests down, then fasten your seat belt tightly. Adopt the bracing position when you hear the command brace, brace. You must remain in that position until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. There may be more than one jolt. When stopped, unfasten your seat belt, remove high-heeled shoes, leave hand baggage behind, I repeat, leave hand baggage behind, and move to the nearest exit. Now read the safety instruction card. Finally, follow the instructions given by the crew.
Fortunately, those reassuringly upbeat messages were never likely to have been played from these tapes outside of a test situation, but it's a sobering thought if you can imagine actually sitting on a plane and hearing those for real. Now, as far as the other messages I haven't played, well, the emergency landing is near identical to the one used for ditching, but without references to water, and the manual decompression message is identical to the auto decompression one. The emergency messages are only in English, and the standard messages on the tapes are only in languages other than English, so here's a bit of a French one.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous allons atterrir dans quelques instants. Veuillez s'il vous plaît rejoindre votre place et vous assurer que votre bagage à main est bien rangé dans le coffre à bagages prévu à cet effet ou sous le siège devant vous.
Now, I know when I've done videos like this in the past, I'll always get lots of suggestions as to things people wanted me to do differently. For example, get the machine working. I've done my bit with this one now. I've got the audio off the tapes. That's what I bought this for, just those tapes. So as far as I'm concerned, this is mission accomplished. But if you've got other things you want to do with one of these, well, there are still a couple for sale on eBay. So you can always buy your own and try and get it working. And good luck to you if that's what you want to do. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.